Hello and welcome. Today we're going to take a look at how we might stop cancer immune evasion. Now, cancer immune evasion is, of course, the behavior of cancer to either stop its detection by the immune system or stop the immune system from acting against it. Now, we can here kind of differentiate between immune suppression and evasion of immune surveillance. Now, if we evade some immune surveillance, then that means obviously that the cancer is no longer detected by the immune system. One of the ways in which the cancer can do this is through the acidic microenvironment of the tumor. We've talked about this in prior videos. The other part of immune evasion, which is immune suppression, is much more varied or goes much more deeper than just the acidity, and has a lot of genetic components to it that allow the cancer to adapt in that way. If you don't know who I am, my name is Merlin. I'm one of the co-founders of Marchwood, where we try to eradicate cancer as a cause of death. And, I'm qualified to talk about cancer because I've got a bachelor degrees in molecular biotechnology, and because I've dealt a lot with the literature on cancer, especially the recent literature on cancer, because our own dad was diagnosed about 4 years ago now, 3.5 years ago, with cancer himself. So that's kind of my background. Now today, talking about immune evasion, or specifically talking about immune suppression, I want to first take a look at why we would want to look at that at all. Why is it important that the cancer has this behavior? Why is it interesting to us? Can we not just treat cancer in other ways? And you'd be true, or you'd be right in that assumption. We can treat cancer in other ways, but the problem with that is that these treatments aren't, or don't have, a 100% penetrance. So if we here, for example, take a cancer cell, then classically we have a few ways of dealing with this cancer cell, or with the resultant tumor from this cancer cell. One of the kind of crudest but most sensible, or most obviously intuitive ways of dealing with a cancer tumor is, of course, surgery. If we find a cancer tumor and we, cut it out, that means there is no longer this cancer tumor. So we've treated the cancer successfully. And that only works if the cancer tumor is solid and if it is localized. So if we just have one or two big tumors, then we can do this. If the tumor is conversely spread throughout the body in a process known as metastasis, then this becomes significantly harder. But there is a possible solution to this. Now, we can use toxins, so poisons, to attack this cancer cell and hopefully damage it enough to kill it. That's what chemotherapy is, and also, technically speaking, what radiotherapy is. And the idea is that you disproportionately affect the cancer cells and leave the normal healthy cells unaffected. Now, this doesn't really work with chemotherapy, as you might know, because in a lot of treatment courses, the patient will actually not be able to be given enough chemotherapeutic dose to kill the cancer without killing the patient. And oftentimes these chemotherapeutic courses are relatively short, because prolonging this treatment with chemotherapy would actually kill the patient, and thus, of course, be counterproductive to what we're trying to do. Now, both of these approaches aren't meant as a cure. They've never been meant as a cure. They're thought to be life prolonging. So the goal of these two here is to prolong life. And I think that should be the primary motivation for all cancer treatment, because if we only look for the cancer cure, then we will miss a lot of life prolonging treatments along the way that could help patients here and now. Now, some of the other ways of supplementing surgery or toxic dosing of cancer cells that we've talked about on this channel before are a thing known as metabolic, or that we like to call metabolic modification, or more specifically, metabolic therapy, which is largely ketogenic diet, and then supplementing that ketogenic diet with certain important nutrients and important kind of sub-pharmaceutical medicines like EGCG and curcumin, which help push cancer cell metabolism in such a way that the cancer cell can proliferate slower. Now, this only kind of slows cancer growth. It doesn't completely stop cancer growth, at least not in all cancer cells, especially if you have advanced cancer cells that have certain genetic adaptations that enable them to use more of the healthy metabolism, and they're not as reliant on glycolysis, which is kind of I would say the stereotypical or archetypal cancer metabolism. And that archetypal cancer metabolism only holds true basically for very non-advanced cancers and doesn't hold true for advanced cancers who are able to use fat or protein to generate energy. Now, this metabolic modification can still, of course, prolong lives, and it does so quite categorically, but it doesn't have a 100% penetrance. Now, obviously, when we're stacking these different interventions, we may gain a larger penetrance than with a mono application of these interventions. And another intervention that we've talked about on this channel is alkalization therapy. Alkalization, which is predicated upon the fact that cancer cells will use the acidity of their environment to improve their immune evasion. And this acidity of the environment both improves the evasion of immune surveillance, but also the mounting of immune suppression in the local environment. So even when these cancers, which are very acidic, are detected by the immune system cannot fight them effectively because of this high acidity. Now, we have currently, our recommendation is to combine both of these and thus improve cancer survival in patients. But this combination of alkalization and metabolic modifications doesn't address all cancers. It has a relatively high penetrance of, if you calculate it around, should be around 80% or something like that. But 80% isn't 100%, and obviously we want to get to as close as possible to 100%. Now, another approach we can do is, if you've listened to a lot of the things I've said in this video, cancer does evade the immune system, and alkalization therapy helps against that, but it doesn't completely stop it. Why is that? Well, cancer cells, especially advanced cancer cells, will use different strategies to evade the immune system. And one of these strategies is, of course, the acidity, which I will mark here as H+. That's kind of the chemical equivalent of acidity. But other ways they do this is through expression of certain cytokines and cell surface receptors. What does that even mean? Well, if we take this cancer cell here, this cancer cell can express from its genome a gene product. Let's say this gene product is PDL1, and it can express, or it can put this gene product onto its cell surface. And if it does this enough, for example, with PDL1, then the cancer cell will have these cell surface receptors, which signal to the immune system, I shouldn't be killed. And obviously the immune system respects this, because if the immune system wouldn't respect this, this is where you kind of get into autoimmunity and autoinflammation and all of these bad things like rheumatoid arthritis and stuff like that, where the immune system would actually go overboard and kind of stop respecting these shutdown signals. And we see this, for example, in multiple sclerosis, which will have high dose or high levels of serum interleukin 6, which is another strategy cancer also uses. So cancer can also produce a gene product like interleukin 6, which is a cytokine. And these cytokines will have, depending on what cytokine it is, they will have different signaling functions on the immune system. Now, interleukin 6 specifically here, so let's say IL-6, will usually suppress cytotoxic functions. So this suppresses cytotoxicity. And cytotoxicity is nothing more than cell toxicity. So cytotoxicity is the way that T cells, for example, a kind of immune cell, kill cancer cells or other defective or infected cells. And interleukin 6, for example, to get back to multiple sclerosis, is highly expressed in multiple sclerosis, but it doesn't have the effect that it should have. And still, you see in multiple sclerotic patients that cytotoxic T cells will still attack the glial cells or the myelin cells of the nervous system, and those lead to the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. Why does this happen? Well, because the interleukin 6 signaling fails there. Now, interleukin 6 signaling can fail along a lot of different routes. One of these can be vitamin D deficiency, which is also why vitamin D or high doses of vitamin D has been found to stop multiple sclerotic symptoms. So, that's kind of where that comes in. And cancer cells will use interleukin 6 expression and secretion to suppress the immune system or suppress the cytotoxic functions of the immune system. And one of the many things that this interleukin 6 does is that it not only suppresses cytotoxicity, but it repolarizes macrophages. Macrophages are a type of immune cell, and macrophages generally have the function of removing apoptotic cells, so removing basically defective cells that have committed suicide for the improvement of the body. But they also have the function of helping with the regeneration of such damaged tissues. And to fulfill these functions, macrophages will polarize either as M1 macrophages or as M2 macrophages. And for example, interleukin 6 will support the polarization to the M2 phenotype of macrophages. And M2 are regenerative. So they support the remodeling of the extracellular matrix. They support the growth and proliferation of cells. And you can see why we would not want this in the tumor environment. So if we have this M2 polarization of the macrophages and we have cytotoxic suppression, cytotoxicity kills cells, and this regenerative M2 macrophage would support cell growth. So by suppressing cytotoxicity and improving M2 macrophage proliferation, polarization, and function, we would be supporting cancer cell growth and suppressing cancer cell death. And if we think about what we kind of want to do with cancer to treat cancer effectively, we have a cancer cell, this cancer cell, the only way it's going to kill a patient is if it splits into two cancer cells and does so over and over and over, right? And obviously, cancer cells, like all other cells, will also sometimes fail and abort and die. Now, in this schematic here, you can still see that one cancer cell gives you 3, even though one dies. And that is kind of the whole definition of how tumor, or the whole issue of how tumors arise, or sorry, that's not tumor genesis. And tumor genesis is predicated upon the growth rate being in disbalance with the cell death rate. Right? So in healthy tissues, your cells are constantly dividing, but they're also constantly dying off. So for example, if you take your intestinal tract, your gastrointestinal tract, all the kind of intestinal lining will basically be renewed within a few weeks, if not even a few days, because it's so highly active. So it will grow rapidly, very, very rapidly. And if you just had that growth and no death, your intestines would basically become a cancer and kill you within weeks. That's also kind of what you see with intestinal cancer, where this death rate plummets and the growth rate just makes it dangerous to the host. And tumors arise, or cancer arises, through the growth rate outpacing the death rate, and thereby you having a multiplication of cells, especially of defective cells. And we want to improve the death rate and decrease the growth rate, right? So that we can increase the death rate over the growth rate in specifically the cancer. Not all cells, because if we do this with all cells, which is, for example, what chemotherapy does, you will eventually kill the patient before you can kill all the cancer cells. And this is why we have so horrid recurrence rates, which we also have written an article about on our website. But you just can't, by poisoning, you just can't get all the cancer cells before you kill the patients, unless the cancer is very, very susceptible to the poison and all of the rest of your cells aren't. That's basically never the case, but it does happen sometimes. Anyway, we want to slow growth and increase death rate. Now, if we think back to the immune system again and to the issue of immune evasion, if we have a cancer who's stopping cytotoxicity, I need to write properly. If a cancer blocks cytotoxicity and improves M2 macrophage polarization, we have a problem. Because now, just simply by the immune system not functioning properly, and the immune system is the primary defense against cancers which already have genomic adaptations to suppress mitochondrial apoptosis. Now, mitochondrial apoptosis we've talked about in other videos. You can find them on our channel. Today we're going to talk about the immune system specifically. So if you have this cytotoxicity block and the improvement of M2 macrophage function, then you get regenerative, remodeling functions inside the tumor, and the tumor will grow and not be killed, or will basically be supported in its growth by the immune system instead of killed. And obviously we want to invert that. The question is, how? Can we even invert this? Can we even stop this blocking of cytotoxicity and improve M1 macrophage polarization, or stop the M2 macrophage polarization? And the answer to that is actually yes. So you're going to find down in the description below, you're going to find an article about Ganoderma mushroom extracts and their kind of effects on cancer growth. And I'm working on a more comprehensive look at herbal and fungal extracts to do the same. But basically, what all of these extracts do that I'm thinking about now and that we're talking about now is that they improve immune function in the way that they modulate inflammatory signaling. So, for example, Ganoderma lucidum extracts, which is normally known as Lingji or Reishi, these extracts will suppress interleukin 6 signaling and thus improve M1 macrophage polarization and increase cytotoxic signaling of T cells that are already engaged in the tumor. Other compounds that can do this are, for example, capsaicin, which is found in chili. Now, you would have to eat a lot of chili to have a pharmacologically significant dose, but it actually is possible to improve cytotoxicity and inhibit interleukin 6 regenerative signaling in cancer patients with capsaicin and also with Ganoderma lucidum extracts and also with other things. And the point I'm trying to make here is we want to use tools to stop cancer immune evasion. Because cancer immune evasion is basically, after metabolic modification, the next step we need to attack with cancer cells to get the more mature cancer cells. Because if you think back to what I said at the start with mature and immature cancer cells, if we have a cancer cell and this cancer cell is able to, or you're able to slow its growth significantly with metabolic therapy and stop its immune evasion by, I can't write, by engaging in alkalization therapy, then this cancer usually is relatively immature and is relatively non-dangerous. Now, obviously, even if you have a mature cancer, both of these will still help, but they might not be able to completely invert the balance between cancer growth and cancer death because the cancer is perhaps more hardy, doesn't die as quickly, is more adaptable, or just has a higher growth rate. Now, usually mature cancers will actually have a lower growth rate, but have a much lower death rate as well. So basically, in an immature cancer, you will get a high growth rate and higher death rate. And in mature cancers, usually you will get a lower growth rate, but also a far lower death rate, which means that they will eventually just kill you because you cannot get rid of them. You can't kill them. And of course, the immune system usually knows that cancers are there. You will have C-reactive protein in your blood, usually when you're a cancer patient, which is an inflammatory protein. You will also usually have interleukin 6, either because your immune system expresses it or because the cancer cell expresses it. So your immune system does know that the cancer is there. It just can't act against it because of certain immune suppressive signaling. And the good news is that there is research into immunotherapy. Now, classical immunotherapy or the more pharmaceutical immunotherapy has the issue that it is, as I would call it, so we have classical and I don't know how to say this, I guess holistic. The classical kind of Western approach to immunotherapy is to use antibodies against certain structures that cancer would use to effectuate this immune modulation. For example, you would use anti-PD-L1 antibodies or anti-IL-6 antibodies or whatever antibodies. And the problem behind that is that these antibodies will just bind to these signaling molecules and completely stop their signaling. Why is that bad, you might ask? Well, this has a lot of side effects because, as I've also mentioned already, these anti-inflammatory signalings or these anti-cytotoxic signalers, they have a role in stopping autoimmunity. So you get a problem with these classical antibody immunotherapies that you will get kind of autoimmune activity. And this is, for example, something like rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or similar symptoms in these patients that will have these antibody immunotherapies, because the immune system will basically go haywire and attack any cell instead of just the cancer cells. And we want to kind of not force the immune system to do anything. We just want to modulate its signaling a bit. So we kind of want to increase its vigilance. We want to increase its capability of being cytotoxic without forcing it to be cytotoxic. And the problem with these classical antibody therapies is that they oftentimes force the immune system to be cytotoxic against certain cell populations without the immune system being able to auto shut down and thus stop autoimmunity. Also, kind of vitamin D depletion in these populations also doesn't help, because a lot of Westerners or a lot of people in general are vitamin D depleted, and vitamin D is very, very important in modulating immune response, and a lot of autoimmunity is helped by having better vitamin D status. Anyway, we have these other therapeutic approaches which are holistic, or which I call holistic here. The naming doesn't really matter, but what they are is basically you take complex herbal or fungal extract with a lot of different components that don't just force the immune system in a certain way. So, like, let's say Ganoderma lucidum, which is the one that the article on the website is on specifically. This Ganoderma lucidum, for example, has various functional fractions. It has the LZ8 immunomodulatory protein, which has its certain functions of improving cytotoxicity, slowing cancer growth, etc. pp. And the interesting thing is that this isn't the only protein in the immunomodulatory protein fraction of the Ganoderma lucidum. So it has and company, so to speak. And that is obviously helpful because now you have a much more complex response, and you don't have this forcing issue of the antibodies which just push the immune system in one way, but you kind of change the signaling around, change the signal strength, change the ease in which the signaling is made, and kind of improve the capability of the immune system to activate or be active against cancer cells. And then also you will see that Ganoderma lucidum has a polysaccharide fraction, which also is immune activating largely. Also has some components that are immune suppressive in certain ways, or these extracts, these more holistic extracts, they don't have a forcing function, they have a modulating function. So where this over here is forcing, this over here is more modulating. And that is helpful because it means that the immune system can function properly and normally, but still kind of circumvent the immune evasion problem of cancer. And this is actually something we see also in clinical trials, where patients will, with these Ganoderma lucidum extract applications, they will live longer and will live better. I'm going to make the arrow thick. I don't know. They're going to live longer and better lives. with this Ganoderma lucidum extract because it helps the immune system to fight cancer. Now, I don't think that these fungal or herbal extracts are anything special, that they're magical, that they're going to cure cancer, but they are another tool in the tool belt. And as such, if we can stack these tools and have synergisms, as for example exist between Ganoderma lucidum and EGCG, I think also Ganoderma lucidum and curcumin, then we can see a world where the death and growth, or the growth rate of cancer cells, falls under the death rate of cancer cells. And in the long run, this will mean that for a significant amount of patients, cancer will no longer be a cause of death. And if we can do this to the logical extreme by combining so many different treatments and agents and therapies together in a holistic approach instead of a monotherapeutic approach, which is the classical approach, is very monotherapeutic. You either take one chemotherapeutic drug, you take radiation dosing, you take that's it basically, and you do surgery. It's very monotherapeutic. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of modulation of functions. There's not a lot of multi-leveled attack. It's a very silly way of going about it. Now, obviously, the benefit of that is that you know exactly what your compound does. So if you, for example, administer cycloplatin to a patient, you know exactly how this is toxic to the patient, in what dose you can use it, at what dose it kills the patient, at what dose it is therapeutic. And that's kind of a benefit of these monotherapies, of these monocompound therapeutics as well. But the problem is that they're forcing. They're not modulating. And our body is very, very capable of doing a lot of things if we can enable it to do them, and we can improve its functions instead of kind of trying to go in there and destroy it directly. And if we can stack these therapies and these treatments on top of each other, so we can use maybe chemotherapeutics at lower doses that they're not toxic to the patient anymore. We can use metabolic therapy like ketogenic diet and other things. We can use alkalization therapy. We can use these immunomodulatory therapies of Ganoderma lucidum extracts or cordyceps extracts, etc. Even capsaicin, right? And if we can stack these things together, then we might get to a point where the likelihood of a patient dying of cancer becomes so low that for all intents and purposes, we have cured cancer. Now, that is the dream. Obviously, that's kind of what we're here at Martrod are trying to do. But it is just stupid to not use multiple attack points against cancer, because we have these attack points, we have these therapeutics, we have these therapies available. They're extremely safe, they're extremely well tolerated, they don't hamper with classic interventions. They actually improve chemotherapeutic interventions and improve radiotherapeutic interventions and just improve quality of life and quantity of life in patients. And I think this kind of concludes our video, because stopping cancer immune evasion is possible by modulating immune function. And it is possible in a very side effect poor environment, right? These Ganoderma lucidum extracts basically have no side effects, especially at these normal safe doses, which means that we can modulate the immune system without negatively affecting the patient, without killing the patient, without damaging the patient in the long term. That obviously gets us closer to a cure to cancer. Now, is this itself a cure to cancer? I don't think so. I don't think any one therapy, intervention, or treatment is going to be a cure for cancer. But I do think that this combination of various therapies and various approaches will get us closer to a cure on cancer. Hopefully, we can eradicate cancer as a cause of death. With that said, I thank you very much for your attention. I hope this has been informative. If you need help or want help with implementing all of these interventions in your own life, you can go to martrod.com/outlive, where we offer coaching and implementation help to people such as you, so that you may live longer and live better despite your cancer. And obviously, all the resources are linked below. All the citations are going to be in the articles that are linked below. And I think with that, I will wish you swift healing and lasting health. May God bless you and your family. Cheers.